So as I mentioned, welcome to our webinar, Retirement Planning During COVID-19. Today's session is pretty short and sweet, so it's not super long. We're just gonna go over some highlights, some changes that we've seen this year, and we're gonna go through a little bit of history of COVID-19, what we've seen. My name is Rachel Gustafson, and I'm going to be guiding you through our webinar today. A little bit about who we are. We are a woman-owned and run firm, and we specialize in building customized plans for our clients. And we also offer financial education, much like what you're seeing today. We often hold these as seminars in person, but with COVID-19, we've moved to a more webinar platform, just so we can meet you in your home. All the planners on our team are certified financial planners, which if you aren't familiar with the designation, we went through extensive training and experience requirements, and we committed to CFP Board's ethical standards. That requires us to put our clients' interests first. So no matter your financial situation, we meet you where you're at and we help your money work harder for you. We truly believe that everyone deserves peace of mind in their finances. Without further ado, let's get started. Some of you may recall this test pattern from the early days of television. It was in wide use in 1963 when the government introduced the emergency broadcasting system. It was established to alert the American public in the event of a grave national crisis. However, as we've seen this year, a serious national or even international crisis doesn't always arrive in a flash. Sometimes it starts small. So we're going to start from the beginning and we're going to walk through what we've seen so far. The world's first introduction to our current global challenge came on the last day of 2019, when a report emerged out of China detailing an alarming cluster of pneumonia-like infections in the city of Wuhan. 1 week later, Chinese researchers confirmed a novel coronavirus as the source of this mysterious Wuhan infection. Soon it would be known as COVID-19, which stands for coronavirus disease, first seen in 2019. During the month of February, markets around the world initially shrugged off the virus, but then started to drop. By the second week of March, the bottom fell out as the virus spread. On March 11, the World Health Organization declared the novel coronavirus outbreak a pandemic as the virus spread to more than 120 nations around the globe. Many of you may remember this. If you had stocks and investments, the markets reacted pretty badly to the pandemic news. Wasn't just the markets though, it was also world economies that began to shudder at the prospect of a highly infectious disease, forcing a vast reduction of global and national commerce. On March 13th, President Trump declared a national emergency concerning the novel coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak. Around the world, the pandemic has prompted a global economic shutdown that started in March and continues today. By March 25th, jobless claims in the U.S. began to soar toward historic levels of over 30 million. The Bureau of Labor Statistics announced that July ended with 16.3 million unemployed persons, or unemployment rate of 10.2%, the highest we've seen. On March 30th, the biggest funding bill in the history of the world, the CARES Act, was passed by Congress and signed into law. That review of the economic highlights of our current crisis brings us to today's presentation topic: retirement planning during COVID-19, what you need to know. So how did we get here? In a nutshell, we're here because a highly infectious virus is spreading around the world. Governments have ordered protective lockdowns. They've curtailed movement. Societies have retreated indoors. They're practicing social distancing. The global health crisis has created a global financial crisis. Now nations and states are struggling with the new normal. Even though we are now starting to reopen, we are seeing spikes in COVID-19. So let's look at some of the impacts that we've seen. Impacts include half of all workers worldwide face job loss, travel restrictions in over 100 countries, global supply chains disrupted, GDP forecasts are down, stock markets are seeing a lot of volatility, and oil price is collapsing. And here at home, we're not protected from these trends. US economic impact includes record jobless claims exceeding 30 million. More than 2/3 can't work from home. Home and mortgage sales have dropped, though they are on the rise right now. Factory and services output has dropped. Travel and hospitality sectors are hurt. Retail sales have plummeted. State and local tax revenue is off. Market volatility continues. And we are seeing a severe shrinking of the economy. A recession has started. To sum up our situation into one quote, here's what the top economist from the International Monetary Fund says. It is very likely that this year the global economy will experience its worst recession since the Great Depression. So that begs the question, what do we do? If you're preparing for retirement, considering early retirement, or you just want some insight on some of the recent changes, then we're going to give you some of that today. The goal of our presentation is to help you learn about some of the big changes that affect your retirement, so you can try to maximize your finances and plan for how to weather this unprecedented storm. So we're going to dive in with number one. You have more time to save for retirement. What do we mean? First, there is no more maximum contribution age for individual retirement age or retirement accounts or IRAs. So you can continue contributing to a traditional IRA as long as you have earned income. So previously, you could only contribute until you were 70 and a half, at which point you would be forced to start withdrawing from the account. This was the IRS's way of getting the taxes that they are owed. But as more people continue to work past age 70 and lifespans increase, it makes sense that people want to contribute to retirement accounts for a longer period of time. Now, I mentioned earlier that in the past, savers were forced to withdraw money from their IRAs starting at age 70 and a half. Those withdrawals are called required minimum distributions, or RMDs for short. The Secure Act pushes those forced distributions to start at age 72. Now, due to the CARES Act updates, there are no required minimum distributions for 2020. So if you are required to take a distribution this year, the CARES Act suspends that, so you do not need to take one this year. This gives your money 18 more months to grow tax-free. However, building up large IRAs means larger required minimum distributions in the future, which can have tax consequences. When it's time to start drawing down your retirement assets, this is one of the topics we discuss in our retirement planning sessions when we get together with clients. What are the taxes going to look like? What makes sense for you? This brings us to the second change, the Death to Stretch IRA, which I'm going to explain. But the Death to Stretch IRA means that your kids can still inherit your IRA, or your beneficiaries can still inherit your IRA, but they can only defer taxes for up to 10 years, meaning they must fully distribute the IRA within 10 years. Now, this doesn't apply to spouses. This would be a non-spouse beneficiary, your children or any other beneficiary. So unfortunately, this is not good news. Not only are your retirement savings affected, but the Death to Stretch IRA requires a review of your estate plan thinking. So within certain exceptions, beneficiaries of IRAs, including Roth IRAs, must liquidate the account within 10 years. Previously, IRA owners were encouraged to have younger beneficiaries because those beneficiaries could then stretch out the distributions over their lifetimes, allowing for a longer tax-free growth. Some heirs even plan to use the accounts for their own retirement, but now they have to take the money out within 10 years of the death of the original owner. So for example, if you left your IRA to your daughter, when she inherits it, when you pass away, she has to spend that down within 10 years, as opposed to having it last over her lifetime and potentially leaving to her beneficiaries if she wanted to. So this can have major repercussions for the beneficiary. When you withdraw that money, you will have to report it on your income tax and pay taxes. unless it's Roth IRA. This could also affect the FAFSA if you have children applying for college financial aid and possibly limit your ability to claim certain tax credits. There is no rule about how you draw down the account as long as it is done in 10 years. So you could take out some each year for 10 years or none at all for 9 years and then everything in the 10th year. Planning is definitely needed, and this should include consulting your tax accountant. If you have a large IRA balance and know it will be part of your estate, then we should talk about what your options are. And yes, you do have options. This just changes how we strategize your plan for retirement. So the real lesson from all of these changes, particularly the death of the stretch IRA, is that tax planning is more important than ever. Congress is looking for ways to increase revenue, and one way to do that is to eliminate tax breaks. We may see other changes before the time comes for you to retire or pass on your estate. Now is the time to be working with a financial planner to ensure you are appropriately planning for your future. So this brings us to change number 3, IRA RMD holiday. So as a reminder, RMD required minimum distributions. If you are the government, they typically require you to take required minimum distributions every year from your 401ks or other accounts, even if you don't want to. So these distributions are largely intended to increase government tax revenues, as you have to pay income taxes on them, and they are calculated based on the account value for 2019. What the CARES Act does is it allows you to not take your RMD this year so that you don't have to lose money by drawing money from an account that could be down as much as 30% from last year. If you don't need your RMD, consider not taking it this year. The RMD holiday also applies to beneficiary and inherited IRAs. Change number 4. Penalty-free withdrawal from IRAs and retirement plans. So usually there is a 10% penalty for early withdrawals from a retirement account. So if you take a withdrawal before age 59 and a half, that's considered early, and there's a 10% penalty. That is gone for withdrawals of up to $100,000 if made on or after January 1st of this year. If it is a coronavirus-related distribution. The law also exempts the distribution from the mandatory 20% withholding, and this is applicable to eligible rollover distributions. So this allows you to include income attributable to the distribution over a 3-year period, and it allows for the recontribution of the distribution to a plan or an IRA within 3 years. So basically what this is saying is if from your employer plan, you have a 401k, for example, when you take a distribution while you're still working and before 59 and a half, they are required to withhold 20% withholding. Because of the CARES Act, they made a change so that you don't need to withhold that 20%. And they even give you 3 years to repay that distribution as opposed to having to take it here. I would like to note that you can only take a penalty-free withdrawal if COVID has impacted your life. Reduced work hours, lost job, you've been furloughed, you had to leave a job to take care of your children, or you have had COVID or someone in your family has also had COVID. These would be reasons that they would allow for that $100,000 to be taken without the penalties. So instead of choosing income over 3 years, like I had mentioned before, you can proactively elect to include all income in 2020, which may make sense for some people, depending on your tax situation. In effect, the law allows you to borrow up to $100,000 from your IRA or any combination of IRAs or qualified plans and repay that amount anytime up to 3 years later with no federal income tax consequences. So essentially, you can think of it as a 3-year interest-free loan. One final note about eligibility: to be eligible for the withdrawal and loan relief provided in the CARES Act, an individual must fall within one of the following categories. The individual, spouse, or dependent is diagnosed with COVID-19, or the individual experiences adverse financial consequences as a result of COVID-19, as certified by the employee of the plan or administrator, kind of along the lines of what I mentioned in the last slide. So it seems that these provisions will be liberally interpreted. Remember, this act is meant to help you and prevent the economy from crashing. The government wants you to stimulate the economy with your spending, so they're giving you another way to do that. So change number 5, new charitable giving incentives. So if giving money to a charity is something that's important to you, here are some ways that it can actually help you. Even if you don't itemize your taxes, there is now a $300 above the line deduction of cash contributions to charitable organizations for 2020. So individuals have no adjusted gross income limit on charitable contributions in 2020. What does this mean for you? If you have an AGI of 100,000, you could donate 10,000 and you could deduct it, lowering your AGI to 90,000. If you have an AGI, which is adjusted gross income of 100,000, you could donate 100,000 and deduct it, essentially clearing your AGI. This is a fairly rare strategy, but it may be viable for you if you sold a business, had another large taxable event occur in 2020. Deductions on cash gifts were previously limited to 60% of your adjusted gross income. So this temporary deduction exception does not apply to cash donations to donor advised funds, as these remain limited to 60% of AGI. Okay, so that was a lot of information that I gave you in a short period of time. So you might be wondering, okay, so there have been some changes that I should probably be thinking about, but what do I do now? Here are some questions that I ask. Of course, consulting with a financial advisor is really the best way to determine your path forward, but some things to think about. Are you thinking about working part-time in retirement? Do Roth conversions make sense for you? And if so, when? Should you be suspending your required minimum distributions? Do you have an updated estate plan? Knowing your kids or beneficiaries must spend down retirement assets in 30 years makes planning really important. There are strategies that you can employ now to ensure you are doing the best, not only for your retirement, but also for your legacy, and that's really important. Some of these changes, especially the death of the stretch IRA, really affect your beneficiaries and may change your outlook on how you're going to leave a legacy to your family, if that is something that is important to you. So these are just a few of the questions that we can help you answer. If you've been thinking about talking to a financial planner, now is a really good time, especially with everything going on in our world. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of people worried about finances. This is a really good time to review your plan, make sure you have a plan, and make sure you have an accountability partner. That's a big part of what we do, is helping people stay on track, because life gets busy and it's really easy to get off track unless you have someone that you know you're going to be going to see in a couple of months to check in. There have been so many changes this year alone, and so we just want to make sure you're prepared. Following the webinar today, you're going to have a survey pop up. It's going to ask you a couple of questions. What topics would you like to hear about? Would you like to meet with us to talk about your retirement plan? It's complimentary. It really gives you an opportunity to ask any additional questions you have from tonight's webinar, or even just ask questions about your own personal situation and see if we may be able to add some value and help you along the way. There's no cost to this as well, so take advantage of it. So as I mentioned,